Hey guys, so a little while ago, I promised you guys that I was going to make a special video. This is towards the beginning of the year when I had my January announcement. And it's taken me some time to get that video together because of all that I wanted to put into it. So I warn you, this is the video, but it's going to be a little long because in this video, I want to talk about a topic that, if you haven't read the thumbnail, I'm about to tell you, that I feel is a question that I hear asked a lot, and I think a lot, that I want to try to explain to the best of my ability, but understand this doesn't mean this is the exact reason why, this is just in my opinion, why. And that subject I want to talk about is, why don't they make comedies like they used to? So let's get talking about this. Hey guys, and welcome to my channel. I'm new here on YouTube, so please consider supporting me and my channel by subscribing, leaving a like and a comment down below in this video, because I really like your feedback, especially on this. So let's start talking about why they don't make comedies like they used to. Now, to answer that question, I really think we have to go all the way back to really understand and explain comedies. Essentially, what a comedy is something that in its particular era, or the year, or the decade, or the century, as the case may be, it came out in, was amusing to people, or was intended to be amusing. Now, oftentimes, to be funny, what you do is you make fun of or make satire of what is out of that time. You may make pop culture references. You may reference something that exists. There are comedies dating back to the days of William Shakespeare. Now, for instance, if I were to read a William Shakespeare comedy, as I have done many times, it's funny, but it's not extremely funny to me. I'm not laughing extremely hard at it. I may chuckle and get a little laugh, like, huh, kind of like that, but that's about it. Because I'm sure a lot of the elements of what he has written about are funny in his own era. And that's something you have to understand with comedy. It's usually comedies work best in the era they come out in or within that time frame, unless they are a timeless comedy. So let's talk about film comedy now, because that's a play. So I'm going to go all the way back to the silent film era to one of the most well-respected comedies in film history called The General. Now, I actually saw this as a kid off a DVD we got from the library. And I know I watched this multiple times. I was just a weird kid like that. I just liked movies, so I watched it. But nevertheless, this movie is a comedy told when they had silent film, and it's told in that respective era. And because of that respective era, it is told from the perspective of a Confederate who's fighting to do the right thing, so to speak, by fighting against the Unions. You see how it fits the era it's in, but not nowadays? You see that? That's just the thing. A movie fits in the context of what is also accepted in that era. And back then, that was accepted society. That was what we were fine. We were like, fine, there's a comedy like that. And the movie to this day is still considered a good one because it does have awesome stunts, and it's well acted, and it's good comedy. It's essentially, also he's trying to join the army to impress this girl. But that is, I think, one of the reasons why they don't make comedies like they used to. You see, I'm sure filmmakers have looked back at comedies and see how a lot of comedies will have things like this, which haven't aged well. And what they try to do with comedies nowadays, at least in my opinion, is they try to make safe comedies. They try, as oftentimes as they can, not to offend anybody, not to make any content that in the future could offend anybody. But if you take away offense from comedy, as crazy as this may sound and a little weird, maybe wrong, but in my opinion, if you take offense out of comedy, all of it, you most likely will not make a very enduring comedy because it is so safe that you can't make as many jokes as you'd like to make. Look at some of the comedies that we have that are considered some of the classic comedies, some of those comedies that really did a great job, whether it be TV or movies. Most of them are comedies that took chances and maybe made a few offensive statements along the way. Look at Airplane. Airplane is considered sort of like a cult following, big, it's got a huge fan base. Everybody thinks Airplane's funny kind of thing. Most people do anyway. And in Airplane, they make fun of religion, they make fun of love, they make fun of other countries, they are disrespectful to the idea of people who are gay. There's a lot of stuff that nowadays you couldn't do. But for a perfect example, I think I want to explain is Mel Brooks and a little movie he made called The Producers. This is by far could have, I mean, it did when it first came out. Came across as one of the most offensive films ever. It's about a bunch of producers who want to make the worst play they can, and they make a musical called Springtime for Hitler. Now, Hitler was a murderer. He's responsible for the Holocaust. He did some of the most disgusting, depraved things any human has ever done. But somehow this comedy, over time, has actually been considered good. But yet it comes across very offensive. Let's take a look at another Mel Brooks film, Blazing Saddles, a film that, again, is extremely offensive and makes very crude statements. Statements that I'm not going to repeat in this review because, kids could be watching and I don't want them to hear what is said in this movie. It is a very harsh comedy. But again, it's considered good. So what makes these comedies, which are offensive, actually good? Well, it's the fact that they kind of aren't being offensive. They actually are poking fun at the idea of people being offensive. Now, not the entire time. For instance, the way Mel Brooks treats gays is usually not necessarily meant to be that. But as in Springtime for Hitler, he himself has said, Mel Brooks anyway, that by making fun of Hitler, it takes the aura that Hitler has himself of being this awesome, perfect person who sat up high, and it knocks it down. It makes him look kind of like an idiot. You kind of laugh at Hitler now. Hitler's not really, someone to be respected. He's a joke. And he's not the first person to think this. Because we have The Great Dictator, a film that came out years before they even made the producers, which is the exact same thing. Someone who you can kind of tell is supposed to be Hitler, and they make fun of him. And that was during the war effort. It was during the war. Okay? That's a big deal for comedy. So essentially what I'm leading up to in this section here is the fact that if you are being offensive, one, are you being offensive in a way to make fun of what actually is wrong? Like Blazing Saddles making fun of racism. Like the Springtime for Hitler play and the producers actually being used to make fun of Hitler. And because of that, people will always relate to that. They will watch that and be like, yes, racism is dumb. They will look and be like, yeah, Hitler was a jerk. They'll always think that way. So the comedy also is a weapon now. It's also a means of expressing yourself. So now people are going to relate to that comedy, or like Airplane in that case. Airplane, on one hand, doesn't really, make any statements like that. It's just being offensive. But it's a stylistic form of it, which is so over the top that it doesn't quite seem to hurt anything. And I think people like to see comedies that try to take chances. That does not mean all comedies, though. So, another kind of comedy I want to talk about is comedies such as Home Alone comedies, the family comedy section. Why don't they really make family comedies like they used to? Well, for example, that is to compare Home Alone, one of my favorite movies of all time, against my least favorite movie of last year. Home Sweet Home Alone. Oh boy! Basically, on one hand, we have Home Alone, a movie that does everything right, hits the beats just right, but you know why it works as a comedy? Is because it's essentially one half realistic family life with a little bit of drama, and the other half, it's over-the-top Looney Tunes. So you're watching it, but you understand these guys, come on, realistically, they wouldn't live through what they've gone through in these two movies. These guys wouldn't be alive. But the joke of it is, they're just a bunch of cardboard cutout villains with over-the-top characters, and they're kind of crazy, and they're like Looney Tunes villains. So it's fun to watch them do it. So that's why that film works. So why is it Home Sweet Home Alone doesn't work? You put too much into it. They try to make the characters sympathetic. They try to give them a reason. They try to make us understand from their point of view, and that doesn't work. Now we don't think it's funny anymore. Because they're not actually doing wrong. They're trying to get their thing back. Compared to these guys who call themselves smart, but they're so dumb that it's not funny, and they leave the sink running after they've burglarized your house. That's different, It's like they're dumb. So you're like, you see the dumb guys get beat up, and falling and getting hit by bricks, which is, by the way, hilarious, you think it's funny. Compared to if you just see a bunch of people which you can relate to being beat up to get their item back, you're kind of like, that's not fair. So I've been going on for a long, long time. So what is the basic point I am making that establishes why they don't make comedies like they used to? The basic thing comes down to this. Nowadays, they try to put too much into movies. Like in Home Sweet Home Alone, they try to make it way too much in a package. When some of the best comedies ever are straight up comedies. There is nothing more to the comedy. It's just a bunch of jokes. Two, they recycle plots, but as they recycle them, we don't want to see that. As in Home Sweet Home Alone, we don't want to see that. Also, they're trying to play it too safe. Or there are oftentimes people who try not to play it safe and in the process make some of the worst comedies of that year. Take, for instance, A Million Ways to Die in the West, a movie that essentially you can tell Seth MacFarlane wanted to be almost like Blazing Saddles, but it doesn't come across that way. It just comes across as boring and too long. Again, too much being put into a comedy. Hollywood seems to have forgotten just what a comedy is. Nowadays, there's a lot of reused jokes, which also aren't funny. They make a lot of innuendos, and a lot of dirty jokes, and a lot of pee jokes, and poop jokes. And this is something that they will use a lot. The same way in the old days. I think one of the throwaway jokes you'd make if you watch an old 30s or 40s comedy was you just put in a gay character. So you have this over-the-top gay character in the movie, and that's the joke in the film, you know? And that's about all they would really have. And I think Hollywood's become too reliant on these kinds of things. There is no wit to the comedy. They don't make wit in the comedy. They want it all to age well. They want it to be acceptable when it comes out. So they don't really make as many things. But there are sections like the romance comedies. But they're not that funny either. I'm going to tell you my favorite romance comedies of all time. Don John and Why We're Sleeping. These two are two of the best movies, in my opinion, that were ever made. But these two are good because they're simplistic, understandable, and relatable. And best of all, there's really nothing that's a comedy about it. It's essentially just real life scenarios. And real life itself is funny. And you don't have to make it all crazy. Nowadays, oftentimes with rom-com, it's so over the top that it doesn't work anymore. And you can go over the top with a comedy that's a rom-com and make it work. There's an older movie that I like a lot called Roman Holiday. This movie is where a princess gets tired of her life, runs away, meets a news reporter who's supposed to interview her but missed his interview. He doesn't tell his reporter, so he decides, hey, I'm going to let her stay with me so I can get the story anyway, an exclusive story with more details. I'm going to pretend like I'm in love with her. In the process, he falls in love with her. That doesn't necessarily sound like the greatest movie, but believe me, it's great. But that's where they went over the top, and it worked. It came out right. It's very big, but still it has enough of it that's relatable and realistic that it works. Now, can you make a movie that is ridiculous? It's insane. There's nothing realistic about the movie, and it works? Yeah. Let's take Anchorman for an example. Anchorman is a perfect example of a film that doesn't make any sense. It's complete comedy, but it's great fun. And they don't make a lot of comedies like that anymore. I'm not lying. I can't think of the last time we had a movie like Anchorman, where it's just a lot of insanity and something to make you laugh. Why is that? Because again, nowadays, they think they have to put more into the film than they actually have to. They think there has to be depth. So essentially what it comes down to is, why don't they make comedies like they used to? Well, here's my bottom line. Comedies now don't want to be considered offensive in any way. Comedies want to have depth now. They want to compete. They have to make money. But yet somehow the comedy jokes they put in superhero movies and the Avengers are probably funnier than the jokes in the comedy. Why is that? Well, the jokes are safe. Plus, you're more concerned about the jokes. Marvel's not as concerned about the jokes as they are. So essentially, what it comes down to is, if Hollywood is not willing to take risks with a comedy, and they're not willing to try something new, or they're not willing to go big, or if they're not willing to just make something so simplistic that it works, they're not going to make good comedies. Now, I have a challenge for you. I want you to name 5 comedies that you saw last year that you liked. I know for me, I can't do that because there's only really about 2 comedies that I was really crazy about last year. This, I think, is another representation of that. People also don't go to see as many comedies anymore because of the way they feel about comedies. The comedy, in my opinion, is dying. But we can fix that if Hollywood makes movies that again appeal to audience. So I hope this whole video made sense. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.